Welcome to lesson 15. We're going to be discussing inventory and record keeping, and this is covered on pages 80 through 84 in your book. So if you haven't done so already, have your book out and ready to go, and we will get started. Okay, so as we mentioned, this closed system of distribution, DEA wants to know where all the drugs are and where they're being transferred to. In addition, they expect each registrant to know exactly, which controlled substances they have on hand in their pharmacy. So they require an inventory. That's your starting position. That's what you're starting with. You're telling DEA, as of this day, this is how many controlled substances I have on hand in my particular pharmacy. So the first day you open for business, you're required to take an initial inventory. And then both Florida law and federal law require a biennial inventory or every 2-year inventory that you have to take. Now, here's another good one where, probably you may take an inventory more often, and many pharmacies actually keep what's called a perpetual inventory of controlled substances. That is not required. But it's not that hard to do with technology these days. But on the NPJE, is a perpetual inventory required? The answer would be no. Both federal law or Florida law does not require a perpetual inventory. Only thing that's required is an inventory every 2 years. And you can't vary that date by more than 6 months. So you don't have to do it exactly the same day every 2 years, but you can't vary it too much, not more than 6 months apart of the previous inventory date. So on the bottom of page 30, about page 80, something doesn't happen too often, but if a drug is not scheduled before and becomes scheduled, or even if it changes from one schedule to another, you have to take an inventory of that particular controlled substance on the day it became scheduled. So you have to kind of keep aware of what's going on if a drug becomes newly scheduled, and you would have to do that in your particular pharmacy. DEA has rules about how you do this inventory and how you count the controlled substances in your pharmacy. And this is on the top of page 81. What they say is you have to make an exact count for all your Schedule II drugs. And this is all drugs on hand in your pharmacy. That means on hand means they're still part of your inventory. Even if they're expired and waiting to be sent back to a reverse distributor, until they're gone and out of your pharmacy, you would have to count those. And if you're in a hospital, you would have to count all the drugs in the hospital, even the ones that are in the emergency room and the operating room. Those are still all part of the hospital pharmacy's single DEA registration, and they want you to actually separate those by department so they know where they actually are. But the overall inventory has to include all drugs on hand in the pharmacy. And that count has to be an exact count for all Schedule II drugs. So if a bottle is open, you'd have to pour them out and count every single Schedule II drug. But for Schedule 3 through 5 products, DEA says, you can make an estimated count as long as the container doesn't hold more than 1,000 tablets or capsules. So does that mean if you got a bottle of 500 of a Schedule 3 through 5 drug and it's open and it comes time to do your inventory, can you just look in the bottle and say, oh, there's 327 in there? Yeah, that's exactly what it says. So that's why I take issue with some of these DEA investigators saying that if you lose one tablet, it's significant. If it's so significant, then how come I can even make an estimated count of a quantity of 500? You obviously don't care that much about it. So that would be inconsistent with their other rules. But don't tell them I said that, because I don't want them to get mad at me. So I do have in the study tip there what I mentioned already, that many pharmacies do more than what's required. They keep a perpetual inventory. Maybe they'll keep a perpetual inventory if there's only their Schedule II drugs, or maybe all controlled substances, but that's not required by federal law and not required by Florida law as well. Okay, so you start with the inventory, and now we're going to talk about other records of things that came into your pharmacy, records of things that left your pharmacy. and how long you got to keep those records. So most records under the DEA rules and also under the Florida Controlled Substance Act says that you have to keep records for 2 years. However, a very important study tip there on page 81, even though the Controlled Substance Act says records have to be kept for 2 years, the Florida Pharmacy Act requires most pharmacy records have to be maintained for 4 years. And this would include your records for controlled substances. So the answer for most records in Florida for record keeping purposes is going to be 4 years, and including controlled substance records. DEA does require that your inventory of Schedule II drugs, and actually all Schedule II records, be kept separate from your other records. So if you have an invoice coming from your wholesaler, your Schedule II products should be listed separately from your other Schedule 3 through 5 products. Now your Schedule 3 through 5 records don't have to be separate, but they do have to be what's called readily retrievable from other records. So sometimes you'll have an invoice for your Schedule 3 through 5 drugs. Many wholesalers will put those records on a separate invoice to make it easier for you. If they're not separated, if the invoice has non-controlled substances and Schedule 3 through 5 controlled substances, as long as the controlled substances on that invoice are marked with an asterisk or an underline, or maybe they're in a different color, that's considered readily retrievable. And that's for this definition of readily retrievable is really for paper records. Readily retrievable in terms of electronic records means you can just pull it out separately, which most computer systems obviously can do. So turning to the bottom of page 81, we start with that inventory like I talked about, and then we have to keep records of what was received into the pharmacy, all controlled substances received into the pharmacy. So what is the record of Schedule II drugs that were received into your pharmacy? Well, you might get an invoice from your wholesaler for Schedule II drugs, but the official record of what was received into your pharmacy is that copy of the DEA 222 form where you recorded the number of containers received and the date it was received. That is the official record of what was received into your pharmacy. So we take the inventory and we add all the things purchased on the DEA Form 222, and that tells us how many Schedule IIs we have in our pharmacy. For Schedule 3 through 5, what is the record? We talked about this before. It's that invoice. That's why these invoices and 222 forms are so important. Now, you're probably going to have stuff electronically as well, but these rules were written when everything was in paper. But you should have an invoice and a 222 form for all controlled substances that are received into your pharmacy. And then what else do we have to keep record of? Well, we want to keep record of everything that came in. We want to keep records of everything that went out. All right. So disbursement of controlled substances, well, hopefully as a pharmacy, the main way that controlled substances are leaving your pharmacy is through prescriptions that you fill, dispensing records. So pharmacies have to maintain records of all their dispensings, and most pharmacies do this electronically, right, with a computer system. I will tell you the rules related to electronic record keeping of dispensing of controlled substances are fairly antiquated. All right, and we're also going to talk about a manual record keeping system, which nobody uses, but these rules are still in the books on the DEA rules. All right, so the electronic record keeping starts on top of page 82, and what it says is the electronic system or your computer system must provide online retrieval of the original prescription information and the current refill history for that prescription as well. And then number 3 is interesting. Number 3 says that the computer system must be able to produce a hard copy printout of each day's controlled substance prescriptions and refills that were done, and the pharmacist who refilled those prescriptions has to verify by signing and dating that printout within 72 hours of the daily printout being printed. Now, nobody does this anymore, okay? And you're probably thinking, why is this rule even in here, okay? I don't know, but my guess is that when the original record keeping rules were all about manual prescriptions, and in a manual system, what you did in the old days, before we had computers, was a pharmacist would fill the prescription, for, let's say, for a controlled substance, and when it came time to do a refill, you'd have to go through your files and pull out the original prescription, turn it over on the back, and write the date of the refill and the quantity filled, and you would initial it, and that was the official record that the patient got a refill. And my guess is when computers they started getting computerized, DEA must have been nervous about these computers that somebody might try to alter their records in the computer, so they wanted the pharmacies to actually print out a hard copy every day of everything that they filled and have the pharmacist sign it within 72 hours to to testify and document that yes, this is accurately what I dispense. Nobody does that, and I'm not sure if anybody ever did that. Okay, then because number 4 gives you an out, it gives you an option, and it says on page 82, it says instead of the daily printout, you can maintain a log book, and each pharmacist signs that says yes, everything that all the refills I did in the computer system today and all the prescriptions I filled were done correctly. And that substitutes for this daily hard copy printout. I know it's old, I know it doesn't make any sense in today's modern world, but you need to know this for the MPJE, all right? And the number 5 is important. Number 5 requires all your pharmacy computer system to be able to print out what's called an audit trail. And they could say, okay, could you please print out, DEA could come to your pharmacy, could you please print out all prescriptions you filled for, Valium 5 milligrams in the past, 60 days, or by this particular doctor, or this particular patient, right? And you can have to be able to print that out with the prescriber's name, the patient's name and address, the quantity and date dispensed, who dispensed it, which pharmacist, and what the original prescription number is. So I kind of say in the study tip, these are really antiquated rules, but you need to know them. And like I said, I think they were originally put into place when we were transitioning from a manual system over to an electronic system. So speaking of a manual system, if there is a pharmacy in the world somewhere, or in Florida somewhere, that doesn't have a computer, like I said, they would have to actually fill out on the back of every prescription, every time they refilled the prescription, the date and the quantity dispensed and the pharmacist's initials on the back. Nobody does that anymore. However, the DEA rules still require for your physical prescriptions that you have in your pharmacy that they be filed in a certain manner, that you separate your Schedule 2s from the other controlled substance prescriptions. So DEA allows 2 ways to do this. These are for your actual physical prescriptions. Okay, File 1 in a 3-file system. File 1 would have your Schedule 2 drugs because they've got to be separate. Remember. Then you would keep a separate file for Schedule 3 through 5 drugs and a 3rd file for your non-controlled substances. Now, what was the reason for this? The reason for this, back before we actually had computer systems, and these rules still apply even if you're using a computer system, for your actual physical hard copy prescriptions, if you have hard copy prescriptions, you have to file them this way. It doesn't apply to electronic prescriptions. What was the reason for this? The reason for this was, remember, before there were computers, if the DEA or local law enforcement or somebody is doing an investigation on a patient or a doctor, they'd have to go through actual physical prescription files. If they're investigating a particular doctor, and they wanted a way to be able to go look through the files and separate the controls from the non-controls, and this 3-file storage system would allow that. The other option was this 2-file storage system, where again your Schedule 2s were filed in one filing system, They always have to be separate. And then they did let you mix in your Schedule 3 through 5s with the non-controls, just like you could do it on an invoice, where the invoice has to be readily retrievable with an asterisk or something. But in your filing system, if you mixed your Schedule 3 through 5s with your non-controls, you literally had to stamp the Schedule 3 through 5 prescriptions with a red C stamp in red ink, and it had to be 1 inch in height in the lower right-hand corner. And I'm old enough to remember doing this when I was an intern many years ago, doing this stamp C thing. And they say if you have a computer system, you no longer have to do the red stamp. And what was the purpose for that? Again, if they were looking for Schedule 3 through 5 drugs and you use this filing system, they could rifle through your prescription files and look for that red C and maybe just pull those out. So it just kind of helped them locate where these records actually were. Really old systems and rules, but they're still on the books and they can still ask you questions about it. So those are the records of all the controlled substances that left your pharmacy via prescription, right? It's your prescription records, your refill records, be it in the computer system or be on the actual prescriptions themselves. So that's a record of what left your pharmacy. But then there are other records of what left your pharmacy too. What other records would there be? Well, we talked about some of those already. If you had a theft or significant loss, you've documented that. So you have DEA 106 form to document, I lost, I had, somebody broke into my pharmacy and they stole this, and this. So you have documentation of where those drugs went. You may have destroyed drugs yourself using what? DEA Form 41. You may have distributed controlled substances to another pharmacy or to a physician's office. How would you do that? You'd have what? You'd have either a copy of the 222 form for the Schedule 2, or you'd have a copy of the invoice. So you have records of where all the drugs that left your pharmacy, so you can show them that there was no diversion going on. And that's the idea here, right? So I start with an inventory, I have records of everything that came in, and I have records of everything that came out. Now there's one last concept when we talk about record keeping, and that is central record keeping. And does DEA allow you to keep records at a central location? Let's say you own more than one pharmacy and you don't want to keep your records at each individual pharmacy. Because remember, each individual pharmacy has its own DEA registration. And DEA said, and some of the big chains probably want to do this, but even some of the smaller, chains or somebody who owns multiple pharmacies may want to do this. And DEA said, you have to notify DEA that you're going to keep central records, and you send them a notification. And if you don't hear back from them within 14 days, that means you're authorized to do it. So you got to notify the local DEA office, and then after 14 days, you can start keeping central records. What you want to remember here is what you cannot keep at the central location. The things you cannot keep at the central location are the completed DEA 222 form. That's the copy of the 222 form that you made when you ordered the drugs, and then when they came in, remember, you filled out the quantity received and the date received, because again, that's got to be kept at the pharmacy where the drugs are received, because that's the record of what came into the pharmacy. The prescriptions, the actual physical prescriptions, or the electronic prescriptions, have to be kept at the pharmacy. I guess they're electronic, they could be kept in the cloud, as long as you can, retrieve them at that location. And then the actual physical inventory that you take every 2 years is for that location. So that's got to be kept at the local pharmacy too. It can't be kept at a central location. Any other record can be kept at a central location. But those 3 records cannot be kept at the central location. Okay, with that, we are done with this lesson, and I will we'll pick up again with dispensing controlled substances on page 84 in the next lesson.